The silence in courtroom 4B wasn't respectful. It was predatory. Two officers sat in the front row, snickering like high school bullies, pointing at the man standing alone at the defense table. They saw a suspect. They saw a statistic. They saw a cheap suit and a quiet demeanor they mistook for fear. What they didn't see was the badge in his pocket, heavy with the weight of the highest law enforcement office in the country. They didn't know that the man they were about to perjure themselves to convict wasn't just innocent. He was their ultimate boss, the director of the FBI, and he was currently gathering evidence for the biggest corruption sting in state history. The trap was set. The gavel was about to fall, and the hunters were about to become the prey. The air in the Cook County Municipal Courthouse smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and quiet desperation. It was a place where dreams went to die, buried under mountains of paperwork and the indifferent drone of bureaucratic procedure. Julian Halloway sat at the defense table, his hands folded neatly on the scarred oak surface. To the casual observer, Julian was nothing remarkable. He was a black man in his late 40s, wearing a charcoal suit that looked a size too big and slightly frayed at the cuffs, a deliberate choice. He wore wire-rimmed glasses that slid slightly down his nose, and his posture was slumped just enough to suggest resignation. He looked like a public defender's nightmare, a man who had already accepted his fate before the trial had even begun. But Julian Halloway was not resigned, and he was certainly not afraid. Underneath the table, his leg tapped a rhythmic, silent beat. It wasn't a nervous tick. It was a count. He was counting the minutes until the proceedings began, cataloging the details of the room with the precision of a hawk scanning a field. He noted the court reporter, a woman named Janice, according to her placard, who looked like she would rather be anywhere else. He noted the presiding officer's empty chair, the leather worn smooth by decades of judgments. And, most importantly, he noted the two men sitting in the first row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecutor's desk. Officer Brett Reynolds and Officer Sean O'Malley. They were the picture of local authority. Reynolds was thick-necked and red-faced, his uniform straining against a torso built on cheap beer and bench presses. O'Malley was younger, wiry, with eyes that darted around the room, looking for someone to intimidate. They sat with their legs splayed, whispering to each other, their eyes fixed on Julian's back. "Look at him," Reynolds muttered, loud enough for his voice to carry, but quiet enough to be plausible deniability. "Shaking like a leaf. Bet he wishes he just stayed in his lane." O'Malley snickered, a sharp, ugly sound. "Guy drives a car like that in our district and expects a welcome mat? Please, he's lucky we didn't impound the thing right there. Probably stolen anyway." Julian didn't turn around. He didn't flinch. He kept his gaze forward, staring at the empty bench, but his mind was recording every syllable. Harassment, bias, premeditation. He had spent the last 6 months orchestrating Operation Glass House, a covert internal probe into the 42nd Precinct. The reports had been horrifying. Shakedowns, planted evidence, excessive force targeting minority drivers. But reports were just paper. To cut the head off the snake, Julian needed something undeniable. He needed to be the victim. 2 nights ago, he had driven an unmarked, seized sedan, a luxury model often profiled by the 42nd, through their patrol zone. He drove exactly within the speed limit. He signaled every turn. He stopped fully at every sign. Reynolds and O'Malley had pulled him over within 12 minutes. They claimed he had a broken taillight. He didn't. They claimed he was swerving. He wasn't. When he politely asked the reason for the stop, things escalated. They yanked him out of the car. They threw him against the hood. They mocked his attitude. And then they found the evidence. A small bag of white powder O'Malley had discovered under the driver's seat. Julian knew exactly where that powder came from. He had watched O'Malley palm it from his own vest. Now, he was here to answer for possession with intent to distribute and resisting arrest. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, snapping Julian out of his reverie. The side door opened, and Presiding Officer Eleanor Sterling swept into the room. She was a formidable woman, with steel-gray hair pulled back into a severe bun. She was known for her no-nonsense approach and her impatience with theatrics. Julian respected her record. She was fair, provided she was given the truth. Today, however, the truth was going to be a complicated thing to come by. "Be seated," Sterling said, arranging her robes. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the docket. Case number 492B, the State versus Julian Halloway. Julian stood up slowly. "Present, Your Honor." "And the prosecution?" A young assistant district attorney, nervous and looking overworked, stood up. "Ready, Your Honor. ADA Miller for the State." "Very well," Sterling said, peering over her glasses at Julian. "Mr. Halloway, I see you have declined a public defender and chosen to represent yourself. Are you sure that is wise? The charges against you are significant." "I am aware, Your Honor," Julian said, his voice soft, trembling slightly. A perfect affectation. "I believe the truth is simple enough that I don't need a lawyer to tell it." Behind him, Reynolds scoffed. A distinct pfft sound that echoed in the quiet room. Sterling's eyes snapped up to the gallery. "Is there something amusing, Officer Reynolds?" Reynolds straightened up, feigning innocence. "No, Your Honor. Just clearing my throat. Allergies." "Keep your allergies silent, or I'll have you wait in the hall," Sterling warned. She turned back to Julian. "Very well, Mr. Halloway. It is your right. Mr. Miller, opening statement?" As the ADA began a stumbling speech about law and order and keeping our streets safe from narcotics, Julian allowed himself a small, imperceptible smile. Let them get comfortable, he thought. Let them think they have the power. The two officers behind him were grinning. They thought this was a slam dunk. They thought they were watching a mouse walk into a trap. They had no idea that the mouse was actually a lion, and the trap was already closed around their necks. "The State calls Officer Brett Reynolds to the stand," Ada Miller announced. Reynolds stood up, adjusting his belt with a swagger that suggested he owned the building. He walked past the defense table, deliberately brushing close to Julian, invading his personal space. Julian didn't move. Reynolds took the stand, swore the oath with a practiced ease, and sat down, turning his best, honest cop face toward the presiding officer. "Officer Reynolds," Miller began, "could you describe the events of the night of November 14th? "Yes, sir," Reynolds said, his voice booming. "My partner, Officer O'Malley, and I were on routine patrol in the district. Around 10:12 p.m., we observed a black sedan moving erratically on 5th Street. The vehicle was swerving across the center line and failed to signal a turn onto Oak Avenue." Julian wrote quietly on a legal pad. "Lie 1, erratic driving. Lie 2, failure to signal." "We initiated a traffic stop," Reynolds continued. "The driver, that man there, the defendant, took a considerable amount of time to pull over. When he finally did, he appeared agitated." "Agitated?" Miller asked. "How so?" "He was shouting," Reynolds lied smoothly, banging his hands on the steering wheel. "When we approached the vehicle, he refused to roll down his window. He was screaming about his rights, refusing to show ID. Classic signs of someone with something to hide." Julian's pen moved across the paper. "Lie 3, delayed stop. Lie 4, agitated behavior. Lie 5, refusal of ID. And then what happened? I asked him to step out of the vehicle for a field sobriety test, given the erratic driving. He resisted. He swung his door open aggressively, nearly hitting my partner. We had to subdue him for his own safety and ours." And the search, Miller prompted. Standard procedure, sir. Once he was secured, we did a plain view search of the driver's area. My partner found a bag containing 20 grams of what tested positive as cocaine, wedged under the driver's seat. The courtroom was silent. This was the narrative that ruined lives. It was a story told 1,000 times in 1,000 courtrooms, usually ending with a plea deal and a prison sentence. Thank you, officer, Miller said, looking satisfied. Your witness. Magistrate Sterling turned to Julian. Mr. Halloway, you may cross-examine the witness. Julian stood up slowly. He picked up his legal pad. He looked at Reynolds, who was smirking at him. The look said, Go ahead, try it. It's my word against yours. Julian walked to the center of the floor. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like a tired uncle. Officer Reynolds, Julian began, his voice polite. You stated that I was driving erratically, swerving across the center line. That's correct, Reynolds said, leaning back. And you said I failed to signal a turn. Saw it with my own eyes. And the visibility that night, was it clear? Crystal clear. Streetlights were on. I saw everything. I see, Julian said. He flipped a page on his pad. And you stated that I was screaming, banging on the steering wheel. Like a maniac, Reynolds added for effect. Officer Reynolds, does your patrol car have a dash cam? Reynolds hesitated for a fraction of a second. It does. But, as I noted in my report, the system was malfunctioning that night. Technical glitch. Happens all the time with that old equipment. Ah, Julian said. A malfunction. Convenient. Just bad luck, pal, Reynolds sneered. And your body camera, Julian asked. Did that also malfunction? Reynolds' eyes narrowed. Actually, yes. Battery died right before the stop. We'd been on a long shift. Both yours and Officer O'Malley's? Yeah, like I said, long shift. Julian nodded sympathetically. That is unfortunate. So, without video evidence, we are relying entirely on your word? My sworn testimony, Reynolds corrected him, puffing out his chest. I've been on the force for 15 years. My word is good. I'm sure it is, Julian said. He walked back to his table and picked up a thick manila envelope. He held it in his hands for a moment, weighing it. Officer Reynolds, Julian said, turning back to the witness stand. You mentioned the streetlights were on. Are you aware that the streetlights on the corner of 5th and Oak were undergoing maintenance that night? That the entire block was actually dark? Reynolds blinked. Well, maybe I misremembered the lights, but my headlights were on. Of course, Julian said. And you said I was swerving. But are you aware that the 2024 model sedan I was driving is equipped with a lane assist system that logs all steering inputs into an internal black box? A black box that records not just accidents, but driving patterns. Reynolds shifted in his seat. The smirk was starting to fade. I don't know about fancy cars. I just know what I saw. We'll get to what you saw, Julian said, his voice hardening just a fraction. Let's talk about the radio. You called in the stop at 10:14 p.m., correct? Sounds about right. And you said I was aggressive, screaming. Yes. Officer Reynolds, Julian said, taking a step closer. Are you familiar with the Federal Communications Act regarding the transmission of emergency frequencies? What? I'm a cop, not a radio technician. It means, Julian said, that even if your dash cam is broken and your body cam is dead, the dispatch radio is recorded at the precinct, and the microphone on your shoulder, it often picks up ambient noise when the channel is open. Reynolds looked at the prosecutor, then back at Julian. So, Julian said, opening the manila envelope. I have here a subpoenaed audio log from Dispatch Channel 4 for that night. Curiously, During the time you claim I was screaming, the background audio is completely silent, except for one voice. Julian pulled out a flash drive. Your Honor, Julian said, turning to Magistrate Sterling. I would like to enter Defense Exhibit A into evidence. It is the raw audio file from the dispatch recording. Objection, Miller jumped up. We haven't seen this. It was filed with the clerk this morning, Mr. Miller, Sterling said, peering at her computer. You would have seen it if you checked your inbox. Overruled. Play it, Mr. Halloway. Julian plugged the drive into the AV system. A hush fell over the room. Static hissed through the speakers. Then Reynolds's voice, clear as day. Dispatch, initiating stop on a black sedan, 5th and Oak. Then silence, no screaming, no banging. Then a voice in the background, Reynolds's voice again, but not speaking to dispatch, speaking to O'Malley. Nice car, let's see if we can rattle him. Bet he's got cash. Then O'Malley's voice. Look at the suit, probably a lawyer or some drug dealer. Let's have some fun. The recording cut off. The silence in the courtroom was now deafening. Reynolds' face had gone the color of a boiled lobster. That, Reynolds stammered. That's out of context. We were joking. Joking about rattling a citizen? Julian asked, his voice sharp as a razor. Joking about fun. We see a lot of bad guys, Reynolds shouted, losing his cool. We have to blow off steam. That doesn't prove anything. You still had the drugs. Ah, yes, the drugs, Julian said. He placed the flash drive down. The drugs Officer O'Malley found. Julian looked at Reynolds with a gaze that was no longer mild. It was cold. It was calculating. It was the gaze of a man who hunted predators for a living. Officer Reynolds, I have one last question for you before you step down. What? Reynolds spat. You said you've been on the force for 15 years, Julian said. In those 15 years, have you ever heard of the name Project Bluefall? Reynolds froze. His eyes widened. He looked at O'Malley in the gallery. O'Malley had gone pale. I don't know what you're talking about, Reynolds whispered. No? Julian smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You will. No further questions, Your Honor. As Reynolds stumbled off the stand, he looked like a man who had just realized the floor was made of thin ice, and he had just heard the first crack. But Julian was just getting started. The courtroom hummed with a new, dangerous energy. The audio recording of Officer Reynolds joking about rattling the defendant had stripped the veneer of professionalism from the prosecution's case, leaving behind something ugly and raw. ADA Miller, the young prosecutor, was sweating. He loosened his tie, a nervous tic that betrayed his growing realization. He had been handed a grenade, the pin had been pulled, and he was the only one holding it. He looked back at Reynolds, who was still fuming at the defense table, and O'Malley, who was chewing a fingernail in the gallery. Mr. Miller, Magistrate Sterling said, her voice cool and sharp. Do you have any redirect for Officer Reynolds? Or are we done with this malfunctioning witness? Miller stood up, his knees slightly shaky. No further questions for Officer Reynolds at this time, Your Honor. Step down, Sterling ordered. Reynolds practically fled the stand, squeezing back into the gallery bench next to O'Malley. They exchanged furious whispers. He's bluffing, Reynolds hissed. He's got audio, big deal. He doesn't have video. We still have the drugs. Stick to the script. The state calls Officer Sean O'Malley, Miller announced, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. O'Malley stood up. He was younger than Reynolds, leaner, with the kind of restless energy that often masqueraded as vigilance, but was usually just aggression. He walked to the stand, trying to look confident, but his eyes kept darting to the manila envelope on Julian's table. After the swearing in, Miller tried to regain control. Officer O'Malley, you conducted the search of the defendant's vehicle, correct? Yes, sir, O'Malley said. After the suspect, the defendant, was secured. And what did you find? I found a plastic baggie containing white powder. Field tested positive for cocaine. It was wedged deep under the driver's seat, like someone was trying to hide it in a hurry. Did you plant that evidence, officer? Miller asked, trying to get ahead of the defense. Absolutely not. O'Malley feigned outrage perfectly. I would never. I take my oath seriously. That poison destroys our community. I just found what was there. Thank you, Miller said, sitting down quickly. He didn't want to give Julian any more ammo than necessary. Julian stood up. He didn't walk to the podium immediately. He took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly with a microfiber cloth, and put them back on. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy. Officer O'Malley, Julian said finally. You seem very certain about where you found that bag. I am. Under the driver's seat. Yes. And you found it immediately? Took a minute. It was hidden well. Julian nodded. He walked over to the exhibit table and picked up the evidence bag containing the powder. He held it up to the light. 20 grams, Julian mused. A significant amount. Enough for a felony charge. Enough to put a man away for 10 years. He turned to O'Malley. Officer, you stated earlier that my car was a fancy model. A 2024 Obsidian Sentinel, to be exact. I don't know the make. Just looked expensive. It is, Julian agreed. It's a very special car. In fact, it's not a standard consumer model. It's a prototype. You know what makes it special, Officer O'Malley? O'Malley scoffed. Does it have a coffee maker? Laughter from the back of the room. Reynolds. The judge slammed her gavel. Silence, Julian smiled. No coffee maker, but it does have a sentry mode. O'Malley frowned. What? Sentry mode, Julian repeated, his voice dropping an octave, becoming professorial. It's a security feature designed for high-risk assets. You see, the car is covered in cameras, not just for parking, and not just for lane assist. There are 8 4K cameras embedded in the chassis, the mirrors, and the interior cabin. And the interesting thing about Sentry Mode is that it activates automatically when the vehicle detects hostile vibrations. The color drained from O'Malley's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. Like, for example, Julian continued, relentless, being slammed against the hood by 2 aggressive officers. Julian turned to the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution claims there is no video evidence because the police body cameras conveniently failed. I submit that there is video evidence from the victim's car, Defense Exhibit B. Objection, Miller shrieked, jumping up. This is ambush. We haven't authenticated this. Mr. Miller, Magistrate Sterling said, her eyes flashing dangerous fire. If this video exists, and it contradicts your officer's sworn testimony about the equipment failure, I don't care if it was authenticated by the ghost of Christmas past. I want to see it. Overruled. Julian pulled a remote from his pocket and pointed it at the large monitor on the wall. Let's watch the search, shall we? The screen flickered to life. The quality was pristine, high definition, night vision enabled. The angle was from the interior dashboard, looking out, but also capturing the driver's side window and the interior. The video showed Julian being yanked out of the car. It showed him standing calmly, hands raised, while Reynolds shoved him against the hood. It showed, clearly, that Julian was not screaming. He was silent. Then, the camera angle switched. This one was from the side mirror, pointing backward and down. It showed Officer O'Malley standing by the open driver's door. On the screen, O'Malley looked around nervously. He checked to see where Reynolds was. Then, with crystal clarity, the courtroom watched Officer O'Malley reach into his own tactical vest. He pulled out a small plastic baggie. A gasp swept through the courtroom. On screen, O'Malley leaned into the car. He made a show of rummaging around. Then he emerged, holding the same bag he had just pulled from his vest, shouting, "Got it! We got a hit!" Julian paused the video. The image of O'Malley, hand in his vest, was frozen on the screen, a digital monument to corruption. Julian turned to the witness stand. O'Malley was trembling. Actually trembling. His hands were gripping the railing so hard, his knuckles were white. "Officer O'Malley," Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Is that you on the screen?" I, O'Malley stammered. "That looks like... It could be manipulated. Deepfakes. AI. It is a raw file, digitally watermarked and uploaded instantly to a secure federal cloud server at the moment of capture," Julian said. "It is unalterable. But if you like, we can zoom in on the baggie you pulled from your vest. Because if we look closely at the timestamp, 10/18/42... Julian clicked a button. The image zoomed in. "We can see a piece of blue painter's tape on the bag, and written on that tape, in black marker, are the initials ER. Julian walked back to his table and picked up the physical evidence bag the prosecutor had brought. "And look at that," Julian said, holding up the real bag. "Blue tape, initials ER. He turned back to O'Malley. "Who is ER, officer? A previous bust? Evidence you pocketed from the locker room to plant on me?" O'Malley looked at Miller. Miller was staring at his desk, wishing he could dissolve into the floor. He looked at Reynolds. Reynolds was slumped over, head in his hands. "I take the fifth," O'Malley whispered. "Excuse me?" Magistrate Sterling leaned forward. "I take the fifth," O'Malley shouted, panic taking over. "I'm not answering any more questions." "You are a witness for the prosecution in a felony trial," Sterling roared. "You cannot plead the fifth regarding your official conduct in the middle of testimony after waiving privilege. Sit down." But O'Malley was standing up. "I need a lawyer. I'm done." "You are done when I say you are done." Sterling's gavel banged like a gunshot. "Bailiff, restrain the witness." 2 court bailiffs moved in, blocking O'Malley's path. The courtroom was in chaos. People were whispering, pointing. Julian stood in the center of the storm, perfectly still. "Your Honor," Julian said, his voice cutting through the noise. "If I may." Sterling looked at him. Her expression had changed from annoyance to a kind of awed curiosity. "Mr. Halloway, I suspect you are not done." "Not quite, Your Honor," Julian said. "You see, the video proves the drugs were planted. It proves perjury. It proves false arrest. But it doesn't explain why." He turned to look directly at the 2 officers, one trapped in the witness stand, the other cowering in the gallery. "They didn't stop me because of a taillight. They didn't stop me because of a lane violation. They stopped me because they were hunting." Julian walked back to his table and picked up a heavy black binder he had not touched yet. He held it up. "It is time to talk about Project Bluefall." The phrase Project Bluefall hung in the air like smoke. ADA Miller stood up, looking pale. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss all charges. The state cannot proceed in light of this evidence. We are dropping the case." "Sit down, Mr. Miller," Magistrate Sterling said, her voice low. "But, Your Honor, we are dismissing—" "I said sit down," Sterling snapped. "You brought this into my courtroom. You wasted the taxpayers' money and my time with a fabricated case. We are not just going to dismiss and go home. I want to hear what Mr. Halloway has to say about this Project Bluefall." She turned to Julian. "Mr. Halloway, the floor is yours. Explain." Julian nodded. He placed the black binder on the defense table and opened it. He didn't look like a defendant anymore. His posture shifted. He stood taller, his shoulders squared. The tired uncle facade evaporated, revealing the steel beneath. For the last 3 years, Julian began, addressing the room, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has been tracking a spike in civil rights violations, narcotics trafficking, and evidence tampering within the 42nd Precinct. Reynolds in the gallery looked up. His eyes were wide with a dawning, horrific realization. We received tips, Julian continued. Anonymous complaints. Officers bragging about taxes they levied on local dealers. Officers bragging about teaching lessons to citizens who didn't show enough fear. But we couldn't get inside. The blue wall of silence was too thick. Witnesses were intimidated. Evidence went missing. Julian walked toward the jury box, even though there was no jury. It was a habit of a seasoned orator. We needed a control group. We needed a test subject that couldn't be intimidated. We needed someone to walk into the lion's den and let the lions bite, just so we could see their teeth. He turned to Reynolds. Officer Reynolds, do you remember asking me what I did for a living while you were cuffing me? You asked if I was a garbage man because of my suit. Reynolds didn't answer. He was breathing hard. I didn't answer you then, Julian said. I'll answer you now. Julian reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. The bailiff tensed, hand moving to his belt, but Julian moved slowly. He pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. The gold badge caught the courtroom lights. It wasn't the small shield of a local detective. It was the large, intricate, eagle-topped shield of the federal government. My name is Julian Halloway, he said, his voice resonating off the walls. I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you, gentlemen, have just arrested your boss. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. ADA Miller's jaw literally dropped. The court reporter stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys. Magistrate Sterling took off her glasses and leaned back, exhaling a long, slow breath. Director, Miller squeaked. Operation Glass House, Julian said, tapping the binder. I authorized it 6 months ago. The car I was driving wasn't just a prototype, it was a mobile surveillance unit. The white powder Officer O'Malley planted. We tracked the batch. It came from an evidence locker seizure in 2021. A case you worked, Officer Reynolds. You stole cocaine from a closed case to plant on innocent drivers. Julian turned to the judge. Your Honor, this binder contains the indictments for Officer Brett Reynolds, Officer Sean O'Malley, and 12 other officers in the 42nd Precinct. It includes racketeering, perjury, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and deprivation of rights under color of law. He looked at the bailiffs. Officers, I am placing these 2 men under federal arrest. You can assist, or my team can come in and do it. They are waiting in the hall. As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. 6 men and women in FBI windbreakers, tactical gear, and weapons drawn streamed into the room. They moved with a precision that made the local cops look like amateurs. Federal agents, one of them shouted. Nobody move! Reynolds stood up, panic overriding his senses. He looked for an exit. This is entrapment. You can't do this. It's not entrapment, Brett, Julian said coldly. It's an integrity test. You failed. 2 agents grabbed Reynolds, forcing his hands behind his back. The sound of cuffs clicking, click, 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 was louder than any gavel. O'Malley was crying. He was still in the witness box, sobbing as an agent read him his rights. I was just following orders. Reynolds told me to do it. He said you were a nobody. That's the problem, son, Julian said, walking up to the witness stand and looking O'Malley in the eye. To you, everyone is a nobody until they have a badge. But the law protects the nobodies just as much as the somebodies. You forgot that. Magistrate Sterling watched the scene unfold with a grim satisfaction. She banged her gavel. "The charges against Mr. Halloway are dismissed with prejudice," she declared. "And Mr. Miller?" The ADA jumped. Yes, Your Honor. I suggest you go back to your office and start drafting apology letters and get me the district attorney on the phone. Now." "Yes, Your Honor." Miller scrambled to pack his briefcase, looking like he wanted to vanish. Julian watched as his agents marched Reynolds and O'Malley out of the courtroom. Reynolds looked back one last time, his eyes meeting Julian's. There was no arrogance left. Only the hollow, terrified look of a man who realized his life was over. Julian adjusted his suit jacket. He picked up his binder. "Thank you for your patience, Your Honor," Julian said to Sterling. "Sorry for the theatrics. It was necessary to secure the chain of evidence." Sterling looked at the FBI director. A small smile played on her lips. "Director Halloway," she said, "in 20 years on the bench, I have never enjoyed a dismissal more, but don't bring a federal sting into my traffic court again." "I promise, Your Honor. Next time I'll take the bus." Julian turned to leave. The courtroom was buzzing. The gallery was full of whispers. But the story wasn't over. The arrest was just the beginning. The 42nd Precinct was a rot, and Julian Halloway had just taken a sledgehammer to the foundation. As he walked down the center aisle, the doors opened again. A swarm of reporters was waiting outside. The cameras flashed, blinding and rapid. Julian stepped out into the hallway, the flashing lights reflecting in his glasses. He was done being the victim. Now, he was the director. And he had a statement to make. "Director Halloway! Director Halloway!" the press screamed. "Is it true? Did you get arrested on purpose?" Julian stopped. He looked at the cameras. "The system is broken," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of judgment. "Today, we started fixing it, and we started from the inside." He walked toward the exit, his agents flanking him. The hunters had been captured, but the jungle was still full of beasts, and Julian Halloway was just getting warmed up. There was one more loose end, the man who gave Reynolds the orders, the captain of the 42nd. Julian pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. "It's done," he said. "Execute the warrants. Take them all." Captain Marcus Thorne sat in his office on the top floor of the 42nd Precinct, his boots propped up on a mahogany desk that cost more than a rookie's annual salary. He was a man who wore his corruption like a second skin, comfortable, weathered, and smelling faintly of expensive scotch and cigar smoke. Thorne was reviewing the weekly collections ledger. The numbers were good. The street tax from the local businesses was up 15%, and the confiscation locker had yielded a bountiful harvest of untraced cash and narcotics that would never see an evidence bag. He chuckled, reaching for the remote to turn on the local news. He liked to watch the midday report. Usually it featured his officers posing with seized drugs, a PR puff piece that kept the mayor happy. The screen flickered to life. Breaking news. But it wasn't a puff piece. The headline screamed in bold red letters, "FBI Sting Rock City. Police officers arrested in courtroom." Thorne frowned. He leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking. "What the hell?" The anchor, looking flushed and excited, was speaking rapidly. In a stunning turn of events, FBI Director Julian Halloway revealed himself as the defendant in a traffic case at the municipal courthouse today. Officers Brett Reynolds and Sean O'Malley were taken into federal custody immediately following the revelation that the director had orchestrated a sting operation known as Operation Glasshouse. Thorne's blood turned to ice. The cigar fell from his fingers, bouncing off his boot and burning a hole in the carpet. Reynolds, O'Malley, two of his most reliable earners. and they had pulled over the director of the FBI. "Idiots," Thorne hissed, scrambling for his phone. "You absolute brain-dead idiots." He dialed his second-in-command, Lieutenant Dante Russo. Dante was the muscle behind the operation, a man whose silence was bought with a cut of the profits and a promise of protection. "Dante," Thorne screamed into the phone. "Where are you?" "I'm in the bullpen, Cap. Everyone's freaking out. You see the news?" "Shut up and listen," Thorne roared. "Initiate protocol. 0. Right now. I want the servers wiped. I want the physical ledgers in the incinerator. Get the reserve cash out of the safe in the basement. We have maybe 20 minutes before." Boom. The building shook. It wasn't an explosion. It was the sound of a battering ram hitting the reinforced front doors of the precinct downstairs. Thorne dropped the phone. He ran to the window. Below, the street was swarming. Black SUVs blocked every exit. Dozens of agents in tactical gear were pouring into the lobby. A helicopter chopped the air overhead, its downdraft rattling the glass. Thorne stumbled back. Protocol 0 was too late. Downstairs, chaos reigned. The precinct lobby, usually a place of boredom and bureaucracy, was now a war zone of shouting voices. "FBI, nobody move! Hands where we can see them!" Uniformed officers, confused and terrified, were freezing in place. Some reached for their radios, others just raised their hands, realizing instantly that the game was up. Walking through the center of the phalanx was Julian Halloway. He had shed his oversized suit jacket and now wore a sleek FBI windbreaker. He looked nothing like the meek man in the courtroom. He looked like the wrath of God. "Secure the exits," Julian commanded, his voice calm amidst the storm. "I want every computer frozen. If anyone touches a keyboard, arrest them for obstruction. Team Alpha, basement. Team Bravo, secure the locker room. Team Charlie, with me." Lieutenant Dante Russo appeared at the top of the stairs, hand hovering near his holster. He was a big man, scarred and imposing, used to intimidating junkies and shopkeepers. "You can't be in here," Dante shouted, trying to bluff. "This is a sovereign precinct. You need a warrant." Julian didn't even slow down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document, tossing it into the air. It fluttered down to Dante's feet. "There's your warrant, Lieutenant. Signed by a federal judge 10 minutes ago. Now step aside or join your friends in cuffs." Dante hesitated. He looked at the agents behind Julian, rifles raised, faces hard. He looked at Julian's eyes. Dante slowly moved his hand away from his gun and raised his arms. "I'm just an administrator," he lied. "We'll see," Julian said, brushing past him. "Cuff him." Julian took the stairs 2 at a time, heading straight for the captain's office. He knew the layout. He had the blueprints memorized. He kicked the door open. Captain Thorne was standing by a shredder, frantically feeding pages into the machine. He looked up, eyes wild, sweat dripping down his forehead. "It's over, Marcus," Julian said, stepping into the room. Thorne stopped. He looked at the half-shredded document in his hand. He tried to compose himself, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. "Director Halloway," Thorne said, his voice cracking. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I was just cleaning up some old files." "Save it," Julian said. He walked over to the desk and picked up the cigar that was still smoldering on the carpet. He crushed it out with his heel. "You have the right to remain silent. But I have a feeling a man like you loves the sound of his own voice too much to use it." "You have nothing on me," Thorne sneered, trying to regain his authority. "Reynolds and O'Malley are rogue actors, bad apples. I didn't know anything about their little side hustles." "Is that right?" Julian asked. He walked around the desk and tapped the computer monitor. Because, according to the encrypted messaging app on Reynolds's phone, which our tech guys cracked about an hour ago, he sent a text to a contact named Kingpin last night. The text read, "Got a live one. Nice car. Bringing the package to the stash." Do you want to guess whose number is saved as Kingpin in his contacts? Thorne's face went gray. And, Julian continued, leaning in close, we have audio from the squad car. Last month, Reynolds complaining about the 60-40 split with the boss. He specifically mentioned that Captain Thorne is getting greedy. Thorne slumped into his chair. The fight went out of him. You can't do this, Thorne whispered. I have friends. The mayor, the commissioner. Your friends are currently scrambling to delete your number from their phones, Julian said coldly. You're radioactive, Marcus. Nobody is coming to save you. Julian nodded to the agents behind him. Get him out of my sight. As they dragged Captain Thorne out of his office in handcuffs, passing the very officers he had corrupted, the station was silent. The emblem of the 42nd Precinct hung on the wall, a shield that was supposed to represent protection. Julian looked at it for a long moment. Tear that down, Julian ordered an agent. We're putting up new management. The Federal Detention Center was a stark contrast to the chaotic precinct. It was sterile, cold, and quiet. In Interrogation Room 1, the air conditioner hummed a monotonous tune. Captain Marcus Thorne sat at a metal table, stripped of his uniform, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with his pale, sweaty skin. He had been stewing for 3 hours. No lawyer had arrived. No friends had called. The door buzzed and opened. Julian walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of Thorne and sat down opposite him. Black, Julian said. Figured you needed it. Thorne stared at the cup. Where's my lawyer? He's in the lobby, arguing with the clerk about filing procedures, Julian said breezily. He'll be here in 10 minutes. That gives us 10 minutes to talk off the record. Well, technically on the record, since the cameras are rolling, but man to man. I have nothing to say to you. That's fine. You don't have to talk. You just have to listen. Julian took a sip of his coffee. I grew up in this neighborhood, Marcus, Julian said softly. Did you know that? 5th and Oak, the same corner where your boys stopped me. Thorne looked up, surprised. My father was a janitor. He drove an old beat-up station wagon. One night when I was 12, he got pulled over by a cop from the 42nd. The cop said he fit the description. They tossed the car, found nothing. So they smashed his taillight with a baton and wrote him a ticket for a broken light. My dad lost a day's wages paying that fine. We didn't eat meat for a week. Julian's eyes were hard, flinty. That was 30 years ago, and when I looked at the stats from your precinct last year, nothing had changed. The same bullying, the same theft, just different faces. It's the job, Thorne muttered. You sit in your ivory tower in D.C. You don't know what it's like on the street. We do what we have to do to keep order. Sometimes you gotta break a few eggs. You weren't breaking eggs, Marcus. You were eating the chickens, Julian countered. We found the stash house, the apartment Dante was renting under a fake name. We found $3 million in cash. We found stolen jewelry. We found firearms that were supposed to be destroyed. Thorne stayed silent, his jaw clenched. But here is the twist, Julian said, leaning forward. We also found the ledger. Thorne flinched. Dante kept a book, every payout, every bribe. And guess what? It goes higher than you. Julian pulled a photocopy of a page from his folder and slid it across the table. Entry 404, the big guy, $10K monthly. Entry 405, City Hall retainer, $15K. Julian tapped the paper. We know you were paying off Councilman Hedges to look the other way on zoning for your stash houses. We know you were kicking up to the deputy mayor. Thorne looked at the paper. His hands were shaking. "If I go down," Thorne whispered, "I'm taking everyone with me." "That," Julian smiled, "is exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Julian sat back. "Here is the deal, Marcus. The train is leaving the station. Reynolds and O'Malley, they are already cutting deals. They are singing like canaries to avoid 20 years in federal prison. They are pinning it all on you. They say you ordered the quotas. They say you ordered the framing of suspects." "Liars!" Thorne slammed his hand on the table. "I gave them autonomy. They went rogue." "Does it matter?" Julian asked. "A jury will see a corrupt captain and 2 young cops who were just following orders. You are looking at 30 years, Marcus. Maybe 40. You'll die in a cell." Thorne's breathing was shallow. The reality of his mortality was crashing down on him. "Unless," Julian let the word hang in the air. "Unless what?" "Unless you give us the councilman and the deputy mayor. You wear a wire. You get them to admit they took the money. You hand us the keys to the city's corruption." Thorne looked at the coffee cup. He looked at the mirror, where he knew agents were watching. "And if I do?" "If you do, I recommend to the U.S. attorney that you get 10 years instead of 40. Minimum security. You might live to see your grandkids grow up." Thorne closed his eyes. He was a predator, yes, but predators have no loyalty to each other when the trap snaps shut. "Dante has the tapes," Thorne said quietly. "What?" "Dante." Thorne opened his eyes. "He didn't just keep a ledger. He recorded the meetings, with the councilman, with the deputy mayor. He keeps the hard drives in a safety deposit box at First National. He told me it was his insurance policy." Julian smiled. It was the final piece of the puzzle. "Tell us the box number, Marcus, and welcome to Team Justice." 6 months later. The courtroom was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different. There was no snickering from the gallery, no arrogant cops in the front row. The room was filled with the families of victims, people who had been wrongly accused, shaken down, or imprisoned by the officers of the 42nd Precinct. At the defense table sat Marcus Thorne, Brett Reynolds, Sean O'Malley, and Dante Russo. They looked smaller now. The swagger was gone, replaced by the hollowed-out look of men who had spent half a year in federal holding. Julian Halloway sat in the gallery, near the back. He wasn't part of the prosecution team today. He was just an observer. Magistrate Sterling was presiding again. She looked down at the 4 men with a gaze that could cut glass. "You have been found guilty," Sterling began, her voice echoing in the silent room, "of crimes that betray the very foundation of our society. You were given a badge, a gun, and the trust of the people, and you used them to rob, to intimidate, and to destroy." She turned to Reynolds and O'Malley. "Officers Reynolds and O'Malley, you targeted an innocent man because of his race and his car. You fabricated evidence with a casual ease that suggests you had done it dozens of times before. Because of your cooperation, your sentences have been reduced, but do not mistake leniency for forgiveness. I sentence you both to 15 years in federal prison." The gavel banged. O'Malley put his head on the table and wept. Reynolds stared blankly at the wall. Sterling turned to Dante Russo. "Mr. Russo, you were the enforcer, the bagman. You kept the records of this criminal enterprise. For your role in racketeering and conspiracy, and your cooperation in the investigations into City Hall, I sentence you to 12 years. Finally, she turned to Marcus Thorne. "Captain Thorne," she said, saying the title with distaste. "You were the leader. You set the culture. You allowed this rot to spread. You traded your honor for a monthly envelope of cash. You attempted to sell out your superiors to save your own skin, but that does not absolve you of the empire of corruption you built." Thorne stood up. He looked old. "I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. and I further order that your police pension be seized and redistributed to a restitution fund for your victims." The courtroom erupted. Applause, tears, shouts of "Justice!" It was a release of years of pent-up anger. Thorne was shackled. As he was led away, he looked into the gallery. He saw Julian. Julian didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the balance had been restored. Outside the courthouse, the steps were crowded with media. The sun was shining, a stark contrast to the gloomy night of the traffic stop 6 months ago. Julian stepped up to the podium. The microphones were thrust toward him. "Director Halloway! Director!" a reporter shouted. "With the councilman and deputy mayor indicted this morning, based on the evidence, is the investigation over?" Julian adjusted his glasses. He looked out at the city skyline. "Corruption is a weed," Julian said. "You can pull it out, but if you don't watch the garden, it grows back. We took down the 42nd Precinct. We took down the politicians who protected them. But the job isn't done. The job is never done." He looked directly into the camera lens. "To every officer who wears the badge with honor, we see you and we support you. But to those who think the badge is a shield for criminal behavior, remember this case. Remember that you never know who is in that car you pulled over. You never know who is watching. The law applies to everyone, even you." Julian turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of agents. He got into his car, a standard government SUV this time, not the flashy sedan. As he drove away, he passed the corner of 5th and Oak. The streetlights were working now. A patrol car was parked on the corner. The officer inside was waving to a group of kids crossing the street. Julian smiled. It was a start. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how arrogance and prejudice met their match in the highest law enforcement officer in the land. It's a reminder that justice might be blind, but it definitely has ears, and sometimes 4K cameras with night vision. If you enjoyed this story of massive karma and sweet justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel growing. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. And let me know in the comments, what would you do if you were in Julian's shoes? Would you have revealed yourself sooner or waited for the trap to snap shut perfectly? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.